Hey gamer friends, I'm Danielle.
And I'm Josiah.
And we are ready to roll.
Today, we're going to be talking about terms for people new to the board game hobby.
Now, I had this idea because, well, for a few reasons. One, we were playing a game with some friends and they didn't know what trick taking was. And so I thought trick taking was a pretty common term.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really surprised me that they didn't know what trick taking was.
Right.
And then we had a friend who was watching our videos, doesn't really know anything about the board gaming hobby.
Right.
And he was like, I didn't understand anything you guys were talking about.
Yeah. So it really opened our eyes to maybe things that we take for granted, terms we take for granted, mm-hmm. that other people who aren't in the hobby don't know. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to make this video to help those people out.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I was looking into doing some marketing for something. And so I learned the term curse of knowledge.
Yeah.
And basically they were talking about how you didn't want to assume that your audience understood everything that you were saying.
Yeah.
Because it can actually be a curse to know something because they don't maybe know all of the different terms.
Yeah.
And I do remember us being new to the hobby and not really knowing exactly what everything meant anyway. So we just thought we would put this together for people who are brand new to getting into board games and just help that along a little bit.
Yeah.
So the first group of terms that we're going to talk about are types of games. So like the first one I thought of was Eurogame.
It's a very popular, common type of game that's being created right now.
Yeah. Well, for a long time. It's basically a strategy game that focuses on that strategy more than maybe a luck variant. Mm-hmm. I guess it has the name Eurogame because it originated in Europe. However, that doesn't really fit anymore.
Matter as much anymore, yeah.
Yeah. It's just it's just a strategic sit down type of game.
They tend to be more crunchy games. Mm-hmm. And by crunchy, I mean getting into the details of strategy.
Right. There's usually not any kind of combat in it, right. Typically. There's a lot of times when you're doing things with resources.
Another type of game is a dungeon crawl. And Dungeon Crawl is a game where you are literally moving through a dungeon and either defeating enemies or solving puzzles or things of that nature, defeating traps. Mm-hmm. And it's that's all it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just going through and fighting. A lot of it is fighting. So it is that combat mechanism is usually a big part of the dungeon
crawls.
Crawls.
Typically very linear. What I mean by that is there's usually like one path that you need to go through.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
In a dungeon crawl.
Yeah. Another type of game is a campaign game. Campaign games are those types of games that like walk you through different scenarios. So they may change the rules just slightly from scenario to scenario, or it may not. It may just be something that you play all these different scenarios and maybe you're working up toward a big boss or something like that. But you're working towards something.
Typically they have an arc.
Yes, that's true.
Or a story that they're telling and you're walking through that story or arc.
Yeah, most of the time they are storytelling games.
Yeah.
Are campaign games. But sometimes they'll throw in campaigns in certain games that it's just like, okay, now if you defeat this with so many points, then you get to move on to the next like level of the campaign.
Right.
So there are games like that would still be considered campaign games.
Absolutely. Another game type is called 4X. And the 4X stands for explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate.
And don't worry if you don't remember that because nobody remembers that.
I don't, certainly.
Yeah, those are like those sprawling, I think of like long games where you're like kind of battling on some sort of map where it's like you're trying to take over the area.
Yeah.
A lot of times space related. 4X have a lot of space like themed games.
Yeah, can you think of any examples?
I know like a newer one is Last Light and it's known for being a short 4X game. So it's supposed to have all of those elements but in a shorter game because most of those games are like, hours long and this is supposed to be a lot shorter version. I've not played it though, so gotcha, I don't know.
I don't even think we have any 4X games.
I don't think we do.
Yeah.
That's not a genre that we typically jump into.
Mm-hmm. Another type of game is called RPG or role-playing game. This is one that's near and dear to my heart. D&D is something I play. There's other RPGs like Pathfinder, DC 20. There's hundreds of RPGs.
And they're kind of board game like adjacent games. They're not considered board games, but they are in that same kind of family. A lot of people who play RPGs play board games and vice versa.
There's a lot of crossover.
There's a lot of crossover,
yeah, in the communities. So anyway, it's really fun. You're playing off of each other. Typically, you're pretending to be a character, moving through an adventure is basically a summarization of what that is.
And then there's something called CCGs. That just stands for collectible card game. So you've probably heard of like Pokemon and things like that. So you can collect different sets of cards and then use them to play a game. And so there's like Magic the Gathering is probably the most popular of all time. And so Magic the Gathering, they come out with different sets periodically, and people will buy certain cards so that they can construct their own deck to play the game with. So, but those are just terms that a lot of people don't necessarily know right away. So those are some of the types of games that you will run into when you start playing board games. And we thought we'd talk about some of the mechanisms within board games that also have some of their own terms.
Yeah, so the first one is deck building or bag building. And those are dice building. All of those kind of fit into the same building mechanism where you are building up your supply of whatever it is, cards or tokens or dice or whatever it is. Typically in those games, you get more powerful as the game goes along, as you're building up your supply. This is one of my favorite mechanisms in all of board gaming.
Yeah, deck building's so fun because you're just like, I want to use my new cards, and I got this, I was able to buy or whatever this other card, and it's a great card. And
and typically in deck building games, they build in a way for you to shed or destroy or discard your sort of not so good cards so that you can get to your good cards faster. And I really love that aspect of it.
And there's also something called engine building. I really love engine builders because you are working through the game to build up each turn.
Yeah.
So there are things that fire off of one another. So if I get this, then I'm able to do this, which then unlocks this, and then I'm able to do this. And it's just kind of that
snowballs.
Yeah, it's a way of like continuing your turn. So it's like, oh, okay, you can do 2 actions on your turn, but by the end of the game, your 2 actions are really all of these like little actions that get to be triggered off of each other.
Yeah. This is definitely a mechanism that she's much better at than I am. It's a little bit slow in the beginning, and then it gets rolling by the end of the game when you get your engine firing and everything starts comboing off of each other. And it can be really, really fun. I'm just not as good at it. So another type of mechanism is trick taking. And this is one where typically it's in card games. Everybody lays down a card, and then based on the game, some property says somebody wins that trick. All of the cards in the middle.
Yeah, usually it's a suit. So like if you think of like a regular deck of cards, maybe it's a diamond suit, and whoever has the highest diamond would take that trick.
Right.
That's kind of the classic way that trick taking is done. And then of course there's so many trick taking games that have come out that they have kind of played off of the different ways that you can do that.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it's usually a suit, and then the high card of that suit wins that trick or that set of cards.
Yeah. One of our favorite games, The Crew, there's little cards that give you a parameter. Like, I will only win the 5 tricks, the 5 cards. And so you have to make sure that you win the tricks where there's a 5 in that's laid down. And so anyway, there's all kinds of things like that trick taking games have done to innovate, and it's really fun. Yeah. I love trick taking.
I do too. It's interesting because this is the one that I said we had people that were like, what is trick taking? Because it is such a classic thing, and so many people have grown up playing like hearts or spades and stuff like that I thought most everybody knew. Yeah. These were younger people.
They were.
And so I thought, oh, wow, it's interesting to see like the difference in generation and how they didn't grow up playing those games. Yeah, so it was a new concept. Anyway, just interesting.
Yep.
All right, the next one is a worker placement or dice placement or anything like that. That is really self-explanatory. You have little workers, you place them out on the board. You have dice, you place it out on the board. And usually that will give you some sort of action or resource when you do that. So you have incentive to place them in certain places on the board. But that's it. That's all that is.
Yeah. The next one that we were going to talk about is card or dice drafting. So this is where there's a pool of cards or dice or whatever it is, and everybody goes around and drafts one of those things. It can be really fun because the card you need or the dice you need may get taken by somebody else, and you have to come up with an alternative plan. But yeah, it's really fun. I love drafting.
And some games even start off with that drafting mechanism. So like you'll have certain cards and you have to pick one and then pass it along, where games will even start off with that drafting.
Yeah. Really fun.
And then there's card shedding, and card shedding games is kind of exactly what it sounds. You're shedding a card. That means you're getting rid of it. And so there are games where maybe you have a big hand, but then you have to get rid of all of your cards or get rid of certain cards. And that's a card shedding game. So one thing that is talked about a lot in rule books that I did not know what this was when I first started in the hobby was Tableau. Seemed like a lot of people were like, put this in your Tableau or building out your Tableau. And I was like,
what the heck is a Tableau?
What is a Tableau? But it's just like your area in front of you, really. And then a lot of times it's made up of cards that you're putting into your area, and that is your Tableau. I don't have any idea where that came from or why that is the term that is used, but it's basically your area.
Yeah, most games now that have tableaus provide a board,
like a player board
or a player mat or something that has a space for where things go. They give you your Tableau that you maybe build out or something to that effect. But yeah, essentially it just means the area in front of you.
Yeah. Okay, so there's some other terms. They're kind of board game related terms that I didn't know what they meant when we first started in the hobby, and I was trying to kind of figure it out as I went. And so I thought there's probably other people out there who had the same issue I did. And the first one is AP. And that just stands for analysis paralysis. And it's kind of like a thing that people joke about because it is when people take a really long time on their turn. Is called analysis paralysis. It's they have a hard time not taking the most optimal turn. And so it causes kind of a bog down of the game. Like when they say games are AP inducing, it means if people struggle with analysis paralysis, they're going to struggle in this game, or maybe people playing with them will struggle with that game. And so that's all that means is analysis paralysis.
You don't know anybody who has AP, right?
This guy.
Yeah, I'm a recovering analysis paralysis player.
Yes. There were times when I would literally just like get up and walk away and then come back to the table because I'm like, are you done yet?
Yeah, I'm getting much better at it.
Yes, for sure.
The next one is called an H index. This is one that I still sometimes don't even know what it means, but basically essentially it's however many games you've played however many times. So like if you've played 5 games 5 times, your H index is 5.
That's right.
And so I don't know really what the benefit of this stat is, but
I think it's one of those things. So board gamers love their stats.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people keep track of their plays and all kinds of stuff, including us. We keep track of our plays. And so I think it's just one of those things that like, okay, I've played this many games this many times. It's just one of those stats that people like to keep track of.
Yeah.
And, we use BG stats for our stats. And so it keeps track of that for you. It tells you what your H index is. So you don't have to look it up. Yeah. Next on the list is BGG. That's Board Game Geek. It is the website. It is like the quintessential website for all things board games.
Yep.
And so that is something that if you've been in the board game hobby for any length of time, you're going to go to BGG at some point because that's how you rate your games.
Yeah.
That's how you kind of look and see what's coming up, what the hotness is, what the top 100 games are. There's forums and if you have a question about a game, you can go in and look, and most likely somebody else has had that question.
Yeah, it's like the home base for board gamers.
Yeah.
It's where everybody goes to get their information.
That's right. So it just holds all of that in one place, which is kind of nice.
Yep, it is. The last board game related term that we wanted to talk to you about is BGA. BGA stands for Board Game Arena. And this is something that we're fairly new to. It's a site where you can play board games online with anyone in the world.
Yes.
And there's a paid version, a premium version, where you can play any of the games. You can start games. There's a free version where you can play only a small number of the games, and you can't start games that are premium.
You can play them. You just have to wait.
You have to be invited. You have to ask to be invited. But
yeah,
it's really fun. There are some games that work super great on VGA, and then there's some games that don't work as well, but they're still fun.
Yeah, they're still fun.
Yeah.
I tend to like in-person plays, of course, a lot better, but it works really well. We have some people that we like to play games with that we don't get to see very often. And so this gives us a way to be able to play with them. And I do enjoy that part.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was our list. These are the terms that we thought, okay, if you were new, you're brand new to board games, which terms would you hear a lot that maybe you wouldn't automatically know what they meant?
Yep.
So I hope this was helpful for anyone who is new to the board gaming hobby. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.
Yeah, and tell us down below in the comments, what was the term that you were most surprised about? Or tell us down below if there's a term that you have heard that you didn't hear us talk about today. We would love to hear about that.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.